All right. Let's talk about chapter 4, which is called in your book Planning, Composing, and Revising. But really, what it is, it's about the basics of business writing. And this is more about style, a little bit about grammar, um, and kind of some examples of this. I think I will do a short video about this one. Reading the chapter is a little bit more helpful because you get a breakdown of several more examples that are in there. So be sure to look at this chapter a little bit more closely to understand that content a little more deeply as well. So, few things. Good business style. We want things to be somewhat conversational, so not overly formal and stuffy. I think that's one of the stereotypes about business communication that isn't really true. As you know, most of the advertising type of copy that you come across, whether it's on social media and YouTube, commercials, whatever, it's pretty friendly. And that's kind of the idea, right? We want things to sound like a person. Even in the internal communication that we're doing with each other, right? We want it to be easy to understand. So it's okay to be conversational, but still, right, on a somewhat formal level, and that we're not using like slang and things like that that are inappropriate. So use of contractions are okay. You may have remembered that from like English class growing up, right? Never use a contraction. Always say cannot. Don't say can't. Things like that. That's fine. First and second person pronouns are okay. So if you're not remembering, right, parts of speech, pronouns meaning like I, you, we. First person pronoun is I, right? A second person pronoun would be you. Third would be they or them. So, but it's okay to say I. It's okay to say you in business writing. We want it to be friendly. We want it to be engaging in general. So it's okay to kind of write in that style. It can be personal and refer to the reader by name. We want our word choices to be simple. So you don't have to go crazy like you're in, writing a flowery academic paper. You want your word choice to be very straightforward without slang. We want sentence and paragraph lengths to be short, right? Not long, drawn out content. We really want our paragraphs to be short so that they're easy to scan. And we want the sentences to be, relatively short compared to a bunch of complex sentences that you might, again, write in an academic or researchy type paper. We're going to use standard English grammar as you typically would. And it's also important to pay attention to the visual impact of the document that you are working on, right? It has to also look good and look easy to read. Just like as though you were reading something on the web, you want it to be something that's easily scanned. So that's a very important component of business style as well. Um, I talk about this a little bit. This content is not in your chapter, but I think it's important to remember that writing is recursive, meaning that you're going to take a lot of steps, but they're not always going to be in order, right? So just like if you were writing a story or writing a screenplay or writing a paper for a class, you start in one place with an idea, you start doing research, you start thinking, you go to another place, and you're kind of all over, and then you write, and then you change it. Business writing is really no different than that. So it's important to remember that you don't just like, okay, I wrote it, it's done. It goes through those same processes of like rethinking and reshaping and editing. And your writing style still comes into play as a business writer, right? So I call it vomiting versus chiseling, which is not the most beautiful metaphor, but I think it makes sense. So some people are writers and they're vomiter writers in that they just write everything that they're thinking, right, and just get it out. Some people are the chiseler type, when they can't go on to the next sentence until that sentence before it is perfect, right? They're kind of trying to chisel it out of marble and make it perfect. And those things matter, and maybe you're sort of somewhere in between, and it depends on the situation. But regardless of which type you are, it's still important for you to follow the same process that you would if you were doing a different type of writing work. That you're planning it ahead of time, that you're revising it, that you're editing it, that it might go through a couple of different drafts and things like that. And that's okay, right? And you're not just trying to get it done just for the sake of getting it finished. Plain language is an important part of business writing. We want things to be simple. So there was an act called the Plain Writing Act, and basically it means federal agencies have to use clear prose. And you kind of want to consider that you should be doing the same thing, right? We want to write like a newspaper, something that a 9th to 11th grade reader could easily understand and digest. So you can divorce yourself from having to use a bunch of complicated language. It's simple, right? Make it straightforward. Your book defines a few of the half-truths about writing, and I kind of want to just go over a few of these. And I kind of have talked about several of them already. So again, never use I or you. That's fine to do that. And or but. We see a lot in advertising copy. It has its place. Does not document sources. That is not true, right? If you are using source material, and you might as you're going through, and you definitely will when you're doing your team project work, it's important that you document your sources, right? You still have, if you've done research, you need to capture that. And then writing as you talk, yes, but no. Depends how you talk, right? You want to make sure that you're still using maybe a semi-formal level of writing just without being overly stuffy. So we want to make sure that you're using words that are accurate, appropriate, and familiar. And this kind of goes down to the connotation and denotation. So let me show you this example here of the difference. This website has just a couple of examples. So a connotation is kind of the emotional meaning of a word, right? The denotation is literally like, what is its dictionary meaning, right? So the first example we see here is a house versus a home, right? A house is just a literal structure that you live in, as it said here, right? Whereas home has the idea of like your family and security and all of those kind of things. So you can kind of look through this list and understand, okay, what are the emotional weight of a word that I'm using to someone? And it can surprise you, right? The way that that kind of functions. So you want to make sure you're picking words, first of all, that you know what it means, right? And that it doesn't have an offensive connotation. So in this example, I believe down here at the bottom, you want to make sure you're using the correct word, right? A lot of times people conflate the meanings of ones that are spelled similarly or sound similar. And that can be kind of an awkward mistake to make because, right, they are similar, but they don't mean the same thing. So make sure you are using the correct language. All right, so technical jargon, please be sparing with this. And you can see in this example, I can't even read this out loud. It like burns my brain. You have to, again, know your audience in this case. If the jargon is something that you know that it's a shorthand for what the audience will understand and know, that's fine, right? But you want to not be overly formal, stuffy, all of those kind of things. And that creates a lack of meaning. This is very difficult to kind of sort through. We want to use active voice most of the time. If you don't remember the concept of active voice versus passive voice, the active voice means that we are looking at the subject doing the action, right? So in the second example here, the students attacked their boring teacher, right? The students are the verb, they're doing the action, which is attacking to the object, their boring teacher. That is active voice. Essentially, the point of it is that the subject and verb are really close together. In the first example, it's passive voice. The teacher was attacked by her students after a grammar lesson. So it's the same meaning, essentially. And you kind of get tricked into thinking that the teacher's the one doing the action, but of course, the students attacked her. So it just makes it a little bit more difficult to figure out the subject. You can kind of tell when you're using passive voice, when you're constantly using to be verbs, like in this case, was, attacked, is, has, right? You're using another word in conjunction with your verb. Just using your verb straight up kind of tells you you're using active voice. Also, if you see the word by, it kind of gives you a clue that you're using passive voice. People ask me all the time, I know, such curiosity, but like, is it okay if I use passive voice? Yeah, it's fine. But again, in general, we want to use active voice because it creates more clarity. We want to focus on the verbs, not the nouns. The fancy kind of English word for this is like a nominalization, where we're turning a verb into a noun, right? We want to think about using the verb first. It's a little bit stronger. So you can kind of see the difference in these examples as well. Eliminate wordiness. So in this example, you can see it's just over, you don't need this much content, right? Vary your sentence structure and sentence length. You want to make them easier to read, but you don't want to just be like, I like dogs. Dogs are cool. Dogs have 4 legs, right? You want to make sure that you're not being exactly the same in your structure, kind of making sure that there's some variety. Beginning your paragraphs with topic sentences is helpful. It's kind of a old school writing idea, right? But the topic sentence is kind of your guiding thought that you're going to talk about for that section. I think it's helpful if you can make your reader understand, right, what that paragraph is sort of going to be about. In the world of business writing or like writing for the web, this shows up a lot of section headers, right, or like titles. Or like if you're looking even in your textbook, they have the kind of titles, right? But that helps us to know what that defining idea is going to be. Editing versus revising. Want to make sure that we're doing both, but we understand the difference between them. Whereas revising is making those big changes, right? I need to reconsider what content, what order, the structure, the tone that I'm using, versus editing, which is kind of those lower level changes. I need to add a comma and, do the surface level stuff. So these are just a few examples. And again, you'll see more of these in the actual chapter itself. But so for example, when I talked about connotation and denotation, we have a word in this example that is a poor connotation. Anyone spot it? I feel like I'm like hosting a kid's show. Who sees it? That's right. It's the word weeded out, right? Kind of has a negative connotation. So we would want to revise that. In this one, we have a case of using non-simple language, and it's a little bit wordy as well. It's overly stuffy. We can revise this to make it much more plain. Here we have another example of active versus passive voice. So again, we want to make sure it's going subject, verb, object. So in this case, the subject should be the employees, right? Employees need to clean the office microwave or whatever. So sometimes you have to add that subject in to make it make sense. We don't have the word employees in here, but it's implied. We have an implied subject. You have to add it. I'm using strong verbs. In this case, the verb is important. We're focusing more on the to be style verb. So instead, we want to find a way to revise that to change it from is important to matters or something like that. That takes out the to be component. Wordiness, another situation where we're just adding too much information. We could say this in a much more simple way. And then finally, parallel structure. This would be, if we're listing items, whether they're in a list in a sentence or listed out this way as bullets, we want them to start in the same way to be parallel with one another, right? So in this case, we have 3 different ways of starting, right? So we have company culture will be discussed, how to use the equipment, and you will get an overview. Those things don't really match. And we could pick any one of them to make them the same. So let's just start with the second one, how to use the equipment. If we wanted these to match, then we would say, how to understand company culture, how to use the equipment, how to connect with customers' needs. Right now they start the same way, so they're parallel, right? If we wanted to use the you, we would say, you will understand company culture, you will learn to use equipment, you will get an overview, right? So making sure that those things are listed in the same way. A lot of times this, you'll see in the example in your book, kind of fail from the point of view of using ing verbs and not matching those. So making sure your lists are matching in style in that way. So that's kind of our brief look at chapter 4. Again, there's I don't want to say better, but further examples in your textbook that I think are worth looking at. So thank you very much. See you next time.